Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner's online public meeting this afternoon. Just to introduce myself, I'm Simon Dennis. I'm the Commissioner's Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer, and I'm standing in for Commissioner Zoe this afternoon, who's unavailable. And the questions that I ask operational colleagues are ones that the Commissioner particularly wanted to pursue on behalf of the public, but they're also ones that I and officer colleagues have derived from the materials that have been made available to us by North Yorkshire Police in preparation for the meeting. And as ever, we'll seek to have an engaging and free-flowing dialogue to explore the important issues around police performance and service to the public this afternoon. I won't do a round of introductions. I don't think that's normally done in these meetings. I think everybody identifies themselves in their background, but if their name's not on there, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself when we come to the segment of the meeting in which you're intending to present. We do have a number of apologies this afternoon, so not least, of course, Commissioner Zoe, who's very sorry that she can't join us this afternoon, but also colleagues from the office, Tamara Pattinson, the Director of Delivery and Assurance, Jenny Newbury, and from an NYP perspective, the Chief Constable, ACC Foskett, and from Unison, John McFall, I understand, is unable to be with us this afternoon as well. And I think that completes the list of apologies, unless anybody has anything to add. And just to make clear a couple of sort of housekeeping matters, in terms of the record of the meeting, as viewers will know and as colleagues will know, the previous meeting recordings that are available through YouTube and the Commissioner's website stand as the public record of the meeting, so we don't prepare a discrete and separate minute. We do publish a segmented recording of the highlights of the meeting as well, so hopefully that's accessible and digestible in terms of the past record of meetings. And we also strongly encourage public questions during the meeting through direct contact with the office via the contact channels that are accessible on our website or via social media. And our colleague is working away in the background to harvest and collate those questions as we move along. And I'll either make sure that they are asked in the relevant section of the meeting, or we will come to a roundup of public questions at the conclusion of today's meeting, with half an hour set aside for those. So please keep those coming. The first item this afternoon is an overall presentation from North Yorkshire Police in relation to force performance and key aspects of that topic. DCC Hussain, ACC Bissett, I don't know which of you I'm coming to in the first instance, but I'll hand over to you collectively to take us through that topic, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, Simon. I'll take us through that. So I'm Scott Bissett, an Assistant Chief Constable for Local Policing and Safeguarding. So good afternoon to everybody. I'll take you through some key elements of performance for North Yorkshire Police. Dave, if you could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the first slide that's touched on is in relation to emergency calls, or 999. This has been a problematic area for the force for some time, but very pleasing to see the recent improvements. So the SLA that we need to answer 999 calls in is within 10 seconds, and that's a national measure. So that's once BT have taken the initial call and they pass it to the force. It's really important to note, you can see on there, we've gone for the last 3 months now consistently above 80%. But really important context to this nationally is in January of 2023, we were 45th out of 45 forces for 999 performance. And as of May, we're now 24th, and we're strengthening and consolidating that position, which is quite right. The public should expect that we pick up the phone in a timely way, particularly in times of an emergency. But there's a context to that as well in terms of the amount of calls we're receiving. So last month we saw an increase of 501 calls, or just over 4% against the previous month, and yet we've still held a good level of performance at this time of year against that SLA of 90%. Just a final one to note on this slide: no force nationally is achieving 90% at the moment. They're all just slightly under that. So I think that's important to note. Is there any questions on that one, Simon?
Couple, Scott, if you don't mind. Accepting what you've just said about the attainability of the threshold, as you'll know, it is the Commissioner's expectation on behalf of the public of North Yorkshire and York that we reach, if not significantly exceed, that 90% threshold. I don't think that you're saying that that's impossible. You're just saying that that is a stretch target that Policing PLC finds elusive at the moment. But what would you say about the attainability of that for North Yorkshire and the extent of your ambition and the Chief Officer team's ambition in that respect?
The ambition is to deliver consistently over that SLA, and the best we can do to deliver that exemplary service. So that's just a benchmark for us. I think accepting that we have plans to increase the resources in the force control room, those plans are tested, they're in place over the summer. In fact, we've just recruited a number of communications officers who are the people that pick up the phone this month. That takes us to over 100 communications officers for the first time for North Yorkshire Police, and that's obviously with the support of the Commissioner in the original business case. But we've also got plans to increase the number of dispatchers in there, and they're the individuals who send operational resources to calls, because this is obviously only one element of that call process, but it's a key one. So yeah, our aspiration will always to be above that 90%, accepting that sometimes of years are busier than others, and summer is a key period for us now, particularly as we head through to September.
And can I ask you about that? And I appreciate the resourcing points are probably part of the answer to this, and you're quite right to highlight the state of play in relation to that and the Commissioner's support for the resourcing of public contact. But the summer busy period for North Yorkshire Police is a predictable factor for this force, and I hope I'm not say anything too controversial when I say that. So that's a known factor and always has been. So what additional effort is being made to cater for what is a known peak in demand?
Yeah, so we have contingencies around increasing resources into the force control room at this time of year, just as we would at other busy times of the year, New Year's Eve being typically one that's quoted, but also summer plans across the force for how we recognise different areas of the force are busier than others at certain times. So those plans are in place. We use them regularly. And of course, that complements the hard work of the staff who've been working in there throughout this year. So yeah, I can see the deputy's got his hand up.
Mabs?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I think the other point, really important point to mention, and not only in terms of improvements in the performance, is the elements that we're not in control of. So you'll be aware with some of the national challenges that are occurring with regards to the calls held by BT before they're transferred over to us, and we report that on a daily basis on our logs. So the calls held for a period of time with BT before it comes over to us, which obviously makes it more difficult for us to answer within the time limit of 10 seconds. And then in addition to that, there's been the national issue with the Samsung phones, the Android phones, with the emergency automatic dial that's been occurring. That's increased the number of volume of calls that have occurred nationally by what they're describing as pocket dials or ghost calls unknown to the holder of a phone into the force control room. North Yorkshire Police has been affected by that, as has every other force, and that has impacted on our ability to answer within the 10 seconds SLA and within the 90% of times.
Thank you, Babs. And I understand that from a national perspective, some work is underway to look at the resilience of the single provider model for the purposes of 999. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's been picked up by the National Police Chiefs Council, as was the issue through the National Lead for Contact in relation to the Android phones issue, in particular the Samsungs. Thank you. Thanks, Maps. That's good. And one last question on this. I don't mean to dwell in too much detail on this, but I'm mindful that this is a very significant sort of area for the public, and that's reflected in the Commissioner's postbag around casework, as well as stakeholder feedback that we get ourselves, including as recently today in the context of the Police, Fire and Crime panel. So whilst it's reassuring that the percentages of lengthy waits for call answers are low, I think the Commissioner was struck by the fact that there are any appreciable number of people waiting approaching and over 2 minutes for their call to be answered. You're quite right, Scott, to make the point about the hard work that goes on. But what is there a message that NYP would give around the wait times overall in terms of customer service and the management of risk?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So I think you can see the improvement there. Just to comment on this, so for example, take the over 120 seconds or 2 minutes. We look at those very carefully every day individually to test that it's not our level of service, if you like, that's causing the issue. Some of those are held by BT and we don't get them, and Mabs has already referred to that. But some can be, for example, let's say an accident on the A1 and we'll get multiple calls at the same time from members of the public reporting it. And we could get 16, 17, 19, 20 999 calls in at once. Obviously, the first one we take, we'll dispatch on it, so that there's always nuances to what this data is telling you. But we do scrutinise it daily. We look at performance in a lot of detail in this area to ensure that we're not exposing the public to risk. And our abandoned nines, that's where we don't answer a 9, is minimal. In fact, we've gone months with 0 abandonment rate, which is absolutely where we need to be. So yeah, the reassurance is I mean, it's one of the most fundamental things the police force does, isn't it, in terms of pick up the phone and answer 999. And we've got to continue to improve our service in this area.
And I think we'll talk a little bit later, won't we, about other ways in which the public can report and make contact with the force. But okay, all right, back with you then, Scott.
Okay, thank you. So, Dave, you go on next slide, please. Thank you. So we've covered the emergency calls, or the 999s. These are the non-emergency calls, and the majority of these will come in via the 101 system, which I recognise causes frustration for the public at times in terms of the wait times. But again, the SLA here is an SLA set by the Commissioner locally, so that's to answer the call under 2 minutes. There is no national service level agreement in this area. That's very much a local decision about how quickly we need to answer the phone. Again, you can see from the graph on the top the level of performance that's improving, so touching 70% in May, and that's against a fairly consistent level of demand that's coming in. So I think it's important to look at the first slide and the improvements around 999 and recognise at the same time the improvements in 101 performance. But again, it's not where we want it to be. We want the best times possible, but there have been periods recently where we have been under 2 minutes in terms of answer times. It's sustaining that is the real challenge for us, if you like. I would highlight a key one on there, and that's the abandonment rate for May at 24%. Although that looks very high, and it's too high for us, that has been as high as the mid 40% for North Yorkshire Police. So that is reducing, not where we want it yet, and with aspirations and plans in place to reduce that further. But you've mentioned, Simon, about a message for the public. What we're seeing is, and it's interesting, is when we answer 999s quickly, when we answer 101s quickly, we don't see an increase in 999. So and we know there's a relationship between people being frustrated on 101 and then picking up the 39s. I do want to reiterate, it is frustrating not getting through to us when we're busy, but the 999 is an emergency line, and we need to make sure that we retain it for that. As frustrating as 101 can be, we need to make sure the right people get through to us on 999 so we can pick up the phone quickly. The bottom graph shows you the count of calls by type and waiting periods in there. As you can see, you will see that there's a lot answered within the 0 to 10 seconds. And then as you move along the graph, 2 to 5 minutes and 5 to 10 minutes. But a significant proportion are answered very quickly. And you can see the call volume there as well. That's fairly static, unlike the 9 calls. This is fairly static month on month, although May saw an increase of 500 from April, but there is a direct relation between our effectiveness at picking up 999 and the impact on 101.
Thanks, Scott. So can I ask a statistical question, and please go easy on me if I've misunderstood.
I'll do my best.
58%, 24%, and 9% is not 100%. So what's the remainder, and what happens to those calls?
Yeah, so those calls could be routed differently through the organisation. So QBuster is a system where people will go in. Literally, what it says is they can ask for a call back when an operator's free. So that'll be that section. The 24 abandonment rate is obvious, and this is SCR performance. So a number of our calls will go through to front counters and be picked up there. So this is really looking at our front end FCR performance in terms of what they're doing. So where the FCR are busy, a number are routed through our front counters and answered at that point.
Yeah, thank you. Makes perfect sense. And thank you for not exposing my ignorance on that point too painfully. So thank you. Again, it's sort of statistical, but relates to performance overall. Looking at the top graph, would it be fair to say that performance improvements have levelled off, and are you concerned about that?
I think what we do need to do is recognise the improvements in probably in the last 6 months from November. So it's significant since that time, over the last 6 months, and that's where a number of resourcing and process changes have taken place. I still think there's capability for an increased level of performance, and the team are working really hard to deliver that. So some of it I've already spoken about is the increase in staff that are going in there. We are in a very tight labour market, I think, which people appreciate. But we have a number of people who have an intent to join us between now and October. That will really help in terms of onboarding them, training them, and getting them used to what we need to do. That's a key one. But there have been a number of process changes as well in terms of how we use our systems and introduce new IT solutions to make sure we can prioritise calls and be more productive within the control room. But I would have to recognise, and I do, 2 things. Number one, we need to get to the level we need to be for the public. But number 2, the level of sheer hard work and effort that's gone in to move us to this point. And I am confident with the processes that have been embedded in there and the improvement that when we bring more people in, they're working in an environment in which they can perform, and this will improve.
Yeah, absolutely. A vital point, and endorse that entirely on behalf of Zoe, Scott. So there's a couple of things that I know Zoe wanted to raise, which I'll mention and just see whether you'd like to comment on either of them. So I know that Zoe has had issues raised with her by local councillors in Filey in particular, who think that their experience shows that members of the public are coming to them directly with issues as a result of difficulty at getting an answer through 101. But the overall kind of point around that is a similar one to the 999 point, which is, I think, were Zoe here, she would make clear that having anybody wait over 10 minutes is not the standard to which we would aspire, and it's not obviously something that is anywhere near her local expectation. So a couple of issues, one specific, one general, just to see if you've any observations on either of those things.
I agree. Waiting over 10 minutes is too long, and I think we've touched on the plans that we've got in place to ensure we can improve that position. In terms of Filey, and I am not being facetious, the 101 doesn't discriminate as to where people ring in from, so it depends what time somebody rings during the day. And also, as I've highlighted, there will be times when 999 demand exceeds capacity, and we will prioritise that line, and we have to do that for obvious reasons, and they can be for reasons that are out of our control. As we've said, it could be an incident that attracts multiple calls. And of course, what we can't do is resource the force control room for the peak of demand every day, because it will be wasteful and expensive. And the public also would expect value for money. So it's a difficult balance. We just have to work as hard as we can intelligently to deliver the best service we can with the resources that we've got.
Thank you, Scott. Well, perhaps behind the scenes we'll explore any issues that are bespoke to Filey and see where we go from there. Okay, all right. Back with you to move us forward then. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next one, please, Dave. Okay, so what this graph demonstrates is that the first two slides are really about how quickly we pick up the phone. This graph is about how quickly we attend the incident. We have three grading standards. We have immediate rural, and that's a response time within 20 minutes of receiving the initial call. We have immediate urban, which is a response time of attending from the initial call within 15 minutes. And we have a priority call, which is, regardless of whether it's urban or rural, to attend within an hour. So what you'll see on there is a graph basically demonstrating our performance. You can see the steady increase, particularly in relation to immediate calls, both rural and urban. The challenges with rural in a county like this are fairly obvious, but we work really hard to understand where our staff need to be deployed to be able to provide the best service we can, particularly in more remote areas. The priority one isn't where we want to be, but the caveat I'll put on that, and I take you back to the increase in emergency calls on the previous slide of over 500 a month. And we need to do all we can to get to priority incidents within an hour. That doesn't mean we don't get to them. This is about attendance within the hour. So you will see there continuous improvement on immediate urban, fairly static actually on immediate rural, but a vast improvement from the same period last year. And then we need to improve our priority response times. But you can understand in the context of increased nines why we would prioritise the emergencies and the immediates over something that can wait an hour. But as I've said, it's not that we don't turn up at all. It's the fact that we might be an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. That's a very strict measure of attendance within the hour.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott. And you preempted a point that I know Zoe was wanting to raise with you around that downturn in the graph. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then the bottom graph obviously demonstrates to you just the level of calls across the county in the different areas that we have. It won't come as a surprise where the top three are urban areas in the main, and then the more rural areas compared with them. And then just on the right-hand side, you'll see the total number of incidents that we receive in different categories, ASB, crime, and the third one. And then you'll see the total number of officers that attend. And we use that to really assess the effectiveness of our response and the proportionality of it.
Thank you, Scott. And I should have said this at the beginning, and it's my fault for not doing so. I'm aware that Zoe discourages the use of initials and acronyms. So could I just invite you, and I'll invite every speaker just to define those, to draw those out, if you don't mind. So I think most people know ASB, but
yeah. So that's antisocial behaviour. Crimes, obviously. Then it's public safety and welfare is the third one.
Thanks very much.
So that's clearly where we'll get concerns for somebody's safety.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. So this slide then, it talks about crime levels. The crime pattern actually remains fairly static over recent months, but you can see the improvement from summer of last year, and a steady decline in overall reported crime, which is positive for the communities of North Yorkshire. So that's the top blue line. But the caveat to any policing organisation reporting on their crime stats is, can we trust them? Can we trust that data? And the top box demonstrates our crime data integrity, which is assessed by the Inspectorate of Constabulary. So when we were last inspected in February 19, we had a good grading for our crime data integrity, and we continue to self-test and assure that we are recording crime as it should be, so that actually what we're presenting is meaningful to the public and our own understanding, so we can tackle crime and reduce it. The bottom box is our crime rate per 1,000 population set against the England and Wales crime rate per 1,000 average per thousand population average. And this is an accepted measure of benchmarking used by HMIC, His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary of Fire and Rescue Services, used by them when they come in and assess how well a force can reduce crime and keep the people safe. So you can see there on every measure, bar fraud, and that's because we record fraud slightly differently, and I think we covered that on the previous public accountability meeting.
We did.
That we fare fairly well, and we have quite a large preventative emphasis in our approach to reducing crime, which we've just had discussions around certain crime types this morning at Force Performance meeting with all the senior leaders, and that's obvious from some of the data that we've gone through. Sorry, I can see Amanda with a hand up.
Amanda.
Thank you, Scott. You've touched on it slightly there. I just thought it'd be really interesting for the public to be able to draw out which you've already touched on around fraud. So you can see per 1,000 population there, it is higher than the sort of national averages. What are North Yorkshire Police doing to sort of try and counteract that, and what can members of the public do to try and protect themselves from fraud?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Amanda, and thank you for the opportunity, actually. So some of this, we know there's different ways of committing fraud. There's an awful lot of online at the moment, particularly in the cyber arena. And I know I've got a colleague coming on after me to talk about cybercrime and some of that work that happens there. So he'll be far more qualified than me to offer preventative advice and give the public insights on that. And I'll be listening intently. But there are issues here in terms of how we do record it as a force. We are slightly different. There are other forces record it in different ways as well. But I think it's about protecting yourself online particularly. And I would put myself in a space of having to educate myself on that in terms of how to do that the best I can. And the force offers advice through its own website, through its crime prevention officers. What we do accept, though, is not everybody's got access to the internet. Not everybody uses it, and we need to make sure that those individuals also get the crime prevention advice appropriately. But then we get your scams with people who target vulnerable people in terms of committing fraud against them. So local neighbourhood policing teams in particular will identify vulnerable people. And if any members of the public have got concerns about somebody that they know or a member of their family, then please contact local neighbourhood policing teams and we will offer that crime prevention advice and try and help as far as we can. Action Fraud is another website nationally that can offer that type of prevention advice. But we really do want to do the first step of reducing crime, which is helping people to help themselves to keep safe. But I'm sure my colleague will expand on that further.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. And then, sorry, just on the bottom right-hand graph, obviously gives you the simple count of crime per district across North Yorkshire.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move on to the next graph, which shows you North Yorkshire Police's performance in relation to a burglary residential. I just ask you to bear in mind the table before, which demonstrates we are roughly around just over half the national average rate of burglary residential. So we do have low levels of residential burglary in North Yorkshire, but one is too many. We know what kind of crime and the impact it can have on victims. So we work really hard at both preventing, but also at detecting this element of crime. So you can see from there, good, positive, fairly static performance around residential burglary at the moment. I just draw your attention to one element, one figure on that bottom graph, if you like, or underneath that top graph, which is 24% awaiting outcome. That covers two areas. That covers crime reports that are in our crime management unit waiting finalisation, but it also accounts for a number of investigations that remain on officer workloads being progressed. So that covers two elements to that. And what you'll also see then on the bottom graph is personal robbery. I just think it's important to go to the scale on the left of the graph and look at the numbers of crimes we're talking about month on month. So from, for example, we'll be around 7 in March, up to a higher month of 20 in May, and then around 15 in June, and that's across the force area. So it's important we do scale this in terms of our understanding. Personal robbery, again, is a key priority for our colleagues who work in localities and local CIDs, and we will continue to tackle those. But in general, set against the national picture of average crime rates and the trends that we see locally, both relatively positive and static from our perspective, even though, as I say, there's no complacency, and we've got to keep targeting offenders. We've got to do a lot of preventative work, because we'd rather prevent a victim from taking place and having to conduct an investigation.
Thanks, Scott. Now, it's a similar question in relation to the next one. You're right, the numbers are low. Of course, you've already made the point, and I'm grateful for you doing so, that in respect of what are very sort of person-centred incidents and outcomes, that one is too many for that individual member of the public, that individual victim. But we'll perhaps come to this on a future meeting. But one of the issues that I know is a consistent one in terms of customer feedback, if I could put it that way, is communication and timelines. I think members of the public understand that not every single instance of crime or disagreeable incident can be extinguished at source, and that occasionally things will take time. But we'll park that a little bit for another day, because I think it's an area that we'll need to explore probably on a deeper dive. But in general, I think the force can expect Zoe to explore that quite regularly and quite deeply in terms of the actual customer experience. It's a little bit like, none of us mind if the train is delayed, but provided somebody explains broadly why and broadly how long, and it's that sort of basic customer experience thing that we do pick up a lot of negative feedback about at the moment.
Yeah, so I can I just, I know we'll go into a deeper dive perhaps in the future, but keeping people informed is critically important in terms of confidence in the police and the service that we deliver. And actually, go back to that 101 performance we spoke about at the beginning, and the nature of what our one calls relate to. And we've done a deep dive into that to understand what people's ringing about, and they're asking for an update on their crime. So we need to be much smarter at getting timely, meaningful updates to victims. I completely agree, and it is an area of focus with our colleagues, particularly out on the commands.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.
Yep, Dave, go on, next one, please. Thank you. So again, similarly to, I'll take you back to the national crime trends and the crime rates against per thousand population. And in both these two areas, we fare well against national average. Violent crime, particularly high performing at the moment, I would say. But again, one victim is too many. So it's not being complacent, but it's recognising the reduction in violent crime across North Yorkshire. The bottom graph is more concerning around vehicle crime, but we know where that's taking place. There are plans in place to tackle that, and the characteristic vehicle crime is it can be down to quite a small number of offenders who, for whatever reason, commit a high level of crime. So it really is understanding our intelligence. It's getting the information from communities and our partners about who may be posing that risk. And that's critical there, really, around vehicle crime. Your forensic opportunities are often very limited. It's often committed at a time where your witnesses are limited. So we do depend very much on the public's support in terms of tackling vehicle crime, as we do with any other. The difference with violent crime, obviously, is the vast majority of violent crime are known to the victim. Yes, there's nighttime economy offending, but a large proportion of violent crime relates to domestic violence and violence within the home. So they're the two kind of contrasting reports on both violent crime and vehicle crime.
Understood. Thank you, Scott. Well, I think we'd explored the statistical issues on the previous matter. So unless any of my colleagues have further questions on that, I'm very happy for us to move on.
Okay, thank you. So this slide then talks about, in police parlance, section 136, mental health detentions. What we mean here, put in simple terms, is when an officer, police officer, will find somebody in public who is in immediate need of care or control because of their mental health that they may be displaying at the times, or symptoms of mental health difficulties. So this is where the police have a power to detain people in public. They don't arrest them, they detain them, so that then they can be assessed by a professional as to whether they require further help and specialist intervention through medical teams. So this is important because there's a national concordat in place that would say the police are not the people who should be transporting mental health patients unless they're violent and a high level of violence, and of course we will be expected to do that. So this slide describes how many occurrences we had force-wide in May, which was 30. It demonstrates the average time that the police spend dealing with these occurrences. And the reason for that is we will find somebody in distress or in need. We will compassionately intervene around detaining them, and then we will transport them to a mental health facility. And depending on the availability of a mental health bed or a facility that can adequately and properly accommodate them, we may be with them for some time. So that's why you look at that and think, well, that's nearly, I mean, if you add it up, it's kind of 14, 15 hours, isn't it, worth of time? Sometimes it can take that long. These people are in real need of help. But you can see from that slide that in May, 20 incidents were transported by ambulance. 3 incidents have not recorded, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And of the detentions that police officers made in public, 36, 37% of those resulted in a formal admission into a mental health facility for further support. And that we don't work on this in terms of, oh, we need to get to 100% on that. If someone looks as though they're in immediate care and control, we will rightly intervene because we're not the experts. We can't determine whether someone needs further treatment or not. I referenced there 3 incidents not recorded. That's about how they're transported or not by ambulance. And that's because we rely on the information that's provided to us by health partners. So in this case, Tees and S Weir Valley Foundation Trust, and using our own custody data. And you can see basically there on the bottom graph, we take very few people into police custody. It's not an appropriate place of safety for someone with mental health issues, although we obviously do get some offenders who do clearly have acute mental health problems, and then we have to investigate that criminally. But you can clearly see there's a distinct balance between those going into a health setting and those coming into police custody.
Yeah, it's a very welcome shift, actually, in that respect. But this, of course, is a huge issue, isn't it? Not just in this patch, but across the country, in terms of the impact for individuals and society of mental health more broadly. Yeah. I know Zoe was wanting to pursue some specific questions, but I'm very conscious of time. I think the general point around this, really, which I'd ask you to reflect on in terms of the force's perspective, is there more that we can, or that we are doing, or that we could do in future together to work more effectively with partners, including with the NHS, who of course face their own pressures, to improve not just the statistical position, but the care for individuals who find themselves in these sorts of sets of circumstances?
That's a great question, and I think it's timely as well, because I've just come out of a College of Policing peer review for Right Care, Right Person. We invited the College of Policing to come and have an examination about how North Yorkshire Police and partners have implemented the Right Care, Right Person programme, which, as you'll know, came out of Humberside. I think based on that feedback, the Commissioner has a key role moving forward, working with us and health partners in terms of developing that approach and taking it to a different level of maturity, I think, than we've currently got. We've made a really good start. I think the conversation is happening with partners, but actually we ought to be working a lot more closely together to get the best outcome for a vulnerable person. I think that's what's at the heart of all our reasons why we do what we do. But I think that convening power of the Commissioner will be really important.
Yes, and I know I speak for Zoe when I say we'd be delighted to to continue to amplify the work that's been done based on the Humberside precedent, but also that this is a particularly important area to Zoe as Commissioner. So a conversation I'll be very happy to develop on Zoe's behalf and via the office, Scott. So thank you very much.
Okay, just move on, Dave, please. So this is an identical slide for June. The highlights on here, you will see that the number of incidents we get fluctuate in terms of use of 136. This is half the amount of the month before. But again, I take you to the bottom table, the majority go into a healthcare setting, and a lower amount this month of vulnerable people, which resulted in a formal admission into a healthcare facility. So unless you want me to go any more detail on June, I think we've covered the majority of that.
No, grateful for that, Scott. Thank you.
Okay. So the next slide covers our crime investigation outcomes. So if you don't mind, I'll take you to the bottom one first, which demonstrates the number of positive outcomes for the force. You will see that since the graph goes back to September of last year, there is not far off a doubling of positive outcomes for North Yorkshire Police at 8.7%. And the important thing to note, I mean, that's still not where we want it to be. You know, I think members of the public want their crimes detected, they want justice done and someone held responsible. But I think they're also they also realise we can't do that in every case if there isn't the evidence for us to be able to do it. But still, progress and actually very positive position in terms of the national figure at 5.6%. So that's the first graph I'd just like to touch on. Then I'll go to the top one, and this maybe explains why we are where we are. So the top graph are the amount of crimes that we have outstanding in our crime management unit, essentially. And you will see in the autumn of last year that was up at around 17,000. The national position varies wildly between what forces have in their, what I would call their crime finalisation backlog. Clearly, we recognised it as a risk. Significant resource has been put into reducing this to an appropriate level, and our aspiration is to have around 500 crimes outstanding at any one time, which would mean we're working within the week, basically. So we've moved from nearly 17,000 crimes on the 1st of January this year to around 2,800. We were actually less than that about 3 weeks ago, but we are at about 2,800 now, and we're applying additional resources into there to get to the level we want. But that being said, it's a much more positive picture, and that accounts for some of the increase in the bottom graph, because those crimes waiting for finalisation need some administrative work to be able to claim the outcome on that crime. So some of it is definitely improvements in our investigation, but some of it is administration and reduction of that backlog.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, you know, the performance improvement in this space is remarkable, and I'd associate Zoe entirely with the remarks that you've made around the efforts that have been made by the personnel concerned in that area. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Okay, Dave, on. Thank you. So this slide is very much about our legitimacy as North Yorkshire Police and how we exercise our power of stop search. It is a legitimate tool to reduce crime and keep the public safe. But we absolutely need good, robust scrutiny on how we're using it to make sure we're using our powers in line with the law and in line with the intelligence that officers have got available to them at the time. So you can see the simple count by district is the top left graph. That's how many stop searches are being conducted across the force area. Very often we will use intelligence. We will be deployed to areas of risk where crime is happening. And as I've said, it is a useful and legitimate tool to be able to tackle some of the issues that communities are concerned about. The graph on the right, on the top, demonstrates the proportion by ethnicity of the people that we search. And the bottom graphs then start explaining that in more detail. So you can see the split in the bottom left-hand graph between male and female. The UNK is unknown. That's where we won't have recorded it accurately or properly on the system. Sorry, on the form itself that the officer conducts. You then get a graph on age, and the important one that we spend a tremendous amount of time scrutinising and understanding, as do the rest of UK policing, as you can imagine, is the self-defined ethnicity of the people that we search. So we understand that the Black and ethnic population in North Yorkshire about 4.2%, and you can see there that our stop search is around double that rate of that population. That disproportionality is something that we work really hard to understand, to make sure that we're legitimate, and we're legitimate in the eyes of those communities. Sorry, I think I can see Amanda's hand up, Simon.
Yes, I know Amanda was keen to explore a few things on this slide, so I'll hand over to her.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was just while you were talking through the data there, Scott. So in particular, I know members of the public are quite often interested around circumstances in which a child might be searched, stop searched, and how officers ensure that the child is protected and supported. It's quite an increase as well since the last public meeting we had. So I was just wondering if you could maybe explore that a bit further and explain.
Yeah, so we will, the circumstances in which a child will be searched will be the similar grounds to how we search other people, in essence. I mean, this stop search is particularly around the use of what we call Section 1 stop search PACE powers. So that's where, for example, we believe somebody might have a knife, or they might have a weapon, they may have something else on them that we can search for. Drugs is another something that we may be searching for. In terms of young people, it's got to be done really sensitively. And we know that there are an awful lot of scrutiny nationally and both locally, and a lot of intrusion, quite right, by the Commissioner's office and members of the public into how we do this appropriately. There are times when it has to be done for the safety of the individual and the safety of those around them in terms of officers, but we train officers to be respectful. They need to understand the proportionality of what they're doing. The majority of the interactions will be caught on body-worn video, and should be, rightly, so that we can demonstrate complete transparency about how it's done. And then the grounds for searching people, and particularly children, and including children, then will be recorded formally. Supervisory oversight should be applied, and we know that in our case it's not always, and that's an issue that we're picking up as well internally. So there's an awful lot of scrutiny in this area, but the majority of particularly searching younger people will be on the basis of keeping them and the wider public safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And we did report previously, didn't we, on the number of people who form part of these statistics who are not residents of York and North Yorkshire, but we don't seem to have that data on this occasion. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I think it's because we're really concerned that the data isn't presented in a way that makes as though, policing wise, we treat one group of people different from another. So whether they are from Leeds or Bradford or Darlington or wherever they might be from, the grounds for the powers, the way we exercise our powers, the law doesn't change in relation to whether they live here or not. Yeah. So I think it's important for our own legitimacy and the communication to our officers that they have to use their powers in a way that's fair, proportionate, necessary and legal, regardless of where somebody's from.
Entirely. I can see Mabs is indicating.
Yeah, Scott's covered it all. Thank you, Simon. And I think that's the key point to stress. We've got a use of police powers board, which ACC Foskett chairs. And then also information from that use of police powers board goes to a strategic independent advisory group, which is made up of members of the community and experts in terms of in their own various fields. And we provide the information with regards to our use of stop search, where it's been used, the circumstances it's been used in. They also have the opportunity to look at the search records and so forth as part of that process and provide feedback to the force. So there is a lot of scrutiny that takes place in addition, external scrutiny, in addition to our own internal scrutiny. Through the use of police powers board, we are having a look at a little bit in further detail around the use of stop and search in the Craven area. So that is something that's been picked up as part of it, which Scott is obviously the ACC lead for. And the point Scott's made in terms of the approach that needs to be legitimate around this. I think previously that data was included, Simon, but I think it's incorrect for us to include, because it almost makes it sound like that if you are a resident of North Yorkshire, you're less likely to commit crime than those that are travelling in. We're a county which does enjoy lots of visitors, and therefore we shouldn't be showing any bias to those who live here or externally. It was an inappropriate use of language on our slides, which we have reviewed and decided that it's the wrong thing to do.
That point entirely.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
and a really helpful clarity for the public. So thank you for that. Scott, the remainder of the slide deck, I think, are matters that relate to the running of North Yorkshire Police as an organisation and as a business. Yep. And whilst I wouldn't want you to abridge particularly around the kind of people aspects of matter, could I just, in view of the time that we've reached, could I ask you just to take us through by exception, please, in relation to those slides?
Yeah, of course. So I think on this one, the highlight on here is we know the police uplift programme has been in place for over the last 2 to 3 years. Our baseline is 1,645 police officers. We've achieved that. We've attracted additional funding from the Home Office. We've currently 1,669, as you'll see on there. It's important we manage that in year because we've the funding for 1,645, so we're doing that. That's all I've got to say on that slide. I'll cover the PCSOs on the next one if that's okay. That just gives you an overview and composition of the workforce. You can see there the trajectory, if you like, throughout the year, and the budget, the FTE 23-24 budget for 1645, and we will manage that establishment of police officers very closely throughout the year to make sure we neither dip below it or we overspend, if that makes sense. And we do that through our workforce planning. Pick up on the next one, which is PCSOs. You'll be aware we suspended recruitment of PCSOs because we just couldn't get people to apply for the roles. That was at the time of the police uplift programme. As we reduce our recruitment of police officers because we no longer have to achieve the uplift, we just need to stand still at the moment. Then there may be opportunities in the future, but the numbers of PCSOs all links to our neighbourhood policing model, which I'm currently leading a review of. And we're just having a look at how we can focus our neighbourhood policing teams for maximum effect in communities to provide that prevention and reassurance. That's that one, Dave. That's a question? No.
No.
And then this is the final slide, which is sickness. It looks fairly high in June, but actually, if you track it back, trending year on year, June tends to be a little bit higher. So that pattern's reflected year on year. There's nothing exceptional on there. No department's really standing out. And in fact, some of them have incredibly low levels of sickness for the amount of workload that they carry, which is some real reassurance about the level of commitment and resilience of the workforce, which we keep under review. And we're also really testing our wellbeing offer at the moment to make sure we're trying to support people as best as we can.
Yeah,
so I hope that suffices.
And we've talked a bit, haven't we, in previous meetings and internally about the force's approach to well-being, which is remarkable and very positive. Can I just ask again, go easy on me if I've misunderstood, but I think the public might be struck by coronavirus appearing as a significant reason for absence. Does that puzzle you, or is there an explanation that you're aware of?
I think we accept it's still out there. I think the majority of the public accept that it's still out there and doing the rounds. Our staff will test themselves. They will test and then report. They've got the symptoms. I would suspect that some fitting into the cold and flu may well fall into the coronavirus strategy, but they maybe haven't tested. I think we accept, policing is out and about in communities. That's where we work. We engage people all the time. That's our role. And I don't think I'd have a view on whether that's surprising or not. I think it's, as long as we're not seeing trends that are way over where we'd expect them to be year on year, I think it's just something else that's continuing to do the rounds.
Thank you, Scott.
And that's the end of that presentation, Simon.
Grateful, thank you. Well, look, I'm lifetime displaying the shortcomings of my sharing skills by running us over so long. But thank you nonetheless for the presentation. We'll come now a few minutes behind schedule to our thematic presentation, I think, and Di Mays is with us to introduce that theme, which is all things cybercrime. So I'll hand over to you, Gavin, please.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think given, would it be best if we answer questions at the end here? Because a lot of my slides don't go into specific detail, so that I'll be answering a lot of points as we go through that will probably be best summed up at the end, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay.
Excellent.
And can I ask you to do, as I belatedly asked ACC BISIT to do, just to expand acronyms where they appear, please?
Absolutely. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide, just looking at a breakdown of what the cybercrime unit actually looks like within North Yorkshire Police. So we're made up of a sergeant and 5 constables, and they have multi-disciplinary skills across the function aimed at dealing with incident response, live scene forensics, digital forensics, and then we have more bespoke areas of the team as well that deal with malware analysis, ethical hacking, and have got more experience around computer networking. Obviously very complex areas of business and not something that everybody can necessarily be experts in, but those resources are pooled across the team so that we can deal with any eventualities that may come through. So as I've touched on there, we deal with cyber dependent crime. Now that's some terminology which often becomes quite complicated. The public don't actually understand what cyber dependent crime is, but in its most basic terms, they are what I would like to describe as pure cybercrime. So we're looking there at computer networking attacks against one computer against another computer, attacking ICT infrastructure. Okay, so that's in the most simplistic terms, and I will explain a little bit more about some of the nature of the investigations that we do and what that means as we go on. So the unit itself, we offer a 24/7 365 days a year on-call function. That's not just for cyber-dependent crime, but also for our SIOs in the event of any other serious crimes that may come in across the force, in which they may require our services to deal with any of the aforementioned skill sets there. One of the key things that North Yorkshire has an advantage over other forces is that we have this on-call function, so we can respond to crimes that are reported to Action Fraud, which are reviewed by the National Cybercrime Unit in their triage incident coordination team. So, for example, if there is a lifetime ransomware attack occurring against a business in North Yorkshire, we have the ability to respond to that in North Yorkshire and get out to that scene and deal with it lifetime to prevent the damage getting worse. Okay. I think it's worth me just mentioning here as well what we don't actually do as a cybercrime unit, because quite a lot of stuff can get lost in translation with the term cyber. Okay, so we don't predominantly deal with fraud or economic crime, cyberbullying, cyber stalking, harassment, and other offences such as indecent image of children offences that are shared online. Ultimately, they are not our primary remit to deal with, but that doesn't mean that we don't actually get involved in those. Absolutely we do, but we don't lead on them as the primary investigating officers. But what I will say on that is, in terms of when we go through the slides and I talk about some of the ways we can protect the public, it's the same throughout, be that online, cyber online crime or cyber dependent crime, the ways we protect ourselves are all the same. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in the 1st of April this year, we moved to a nationally led, regionally managed and locally delivered model. That's set by the overarching governance by the National Crime Agency and the National Police Chiefs Council. And the National Cybercrime Unit has overall systems leadership and operational oversight of everything that we do across the portfolio. So taking that down another level, National Cybercrime Unit, NPPT, National Police Cybercrime Unit, essentially task and oversight across all of the 4 Ps: protect, pursue, prepare and prevent. And I'll explain what those are as we go on. Below that, we have the Regional Cybercrime Unit, and below that, we have ourselves. Now, if you were to base that into why it's tiered in that respect, from the top, you have the National Cybercrime Unit that will deal with incidents in relation to critical national infrastructure, so your most serious cybercrime offences that are happening. And then at a regional level, we're obviously looking at cybercrime that is cross-border, maybe, you know, obviously a higher risk there in terms of what the attacks may be. So for an example, when we had the attacks against the NHS, the National Cybercrime Unit led on that, but obviously there were other national health areas of the national health across various different regions that the region picked up with. And then you drop that down to the force level, we would assist with local level inquiries should that attack spread to doctors, surgeries and other pharmacies across North Yorkshire, for example. Okay, next slide, please. So the strategic requirement that's been policing requirements that are set on us by the National Cybercrime Unit, the NPCC, are quite simple, really. Reduce cybercrime, increase the support for victims and potential victims of cybercrime, and reduce the wider fear of cybercrime whilst increasing the public's satisfaction with cyber policing. Now, as we go through the presentation, hopefully that will become apparent how we are doing this and how we're tackling the 4 different P strands: prevent, protect, prepare of cyber-dependent crime. Next slide, please. So the oversight and performance for this is very tightly governed now. So what isn't on that slide there is what happens in force. So from my perspective, obviously I have weekly meetings with my sergeants in terms of what is happening in terms of cyber-dependent crimes, what we're investigating. And then fortnightly, we're having regional meetings with the inspector and sergeants at the regional cybercrime unit to discuss not only what's happening in North Yorkshire, but what's happening at the region and what crime trends are there and if there's anything we need to be aware of. From a monthly perspective, we have regional protect and prevent governance meetings and performance meetings around what we're doing. And I'm regularly feeding into those meetings with the data in terms of obviously where we're at and also ultimately what we're going to be doing next month as well. And quarterly, again, that data is fed into a regional strategic governance group, which is dealt with by the regional organised crime unit and detective superintendents and force superintendents who attend that meeting and discuss performance data that we feed into that. So the cyber threat reduction, what are we doing to tackle cyber and how are we reducing the threat and are we being effective at that? So this is what is happening fortnightly, monthly, quarterly, all the time here. We've got this strict performance and governance overview. Next slide, please. Okay, so the 4 Ps I've touched on. So pursue, that is looking at the detection and disruption of state, criminal and other malicious cyber actors and activists against the UK interests. Put simply, within the function of North Yorkshire Police, these are my investigators. These are the people who have got on call. These are the people who are dealing with all the incidents that are coming in via action fraud, emails, members of the public reporting to the force control room. That is being picked up, and that's a team of 3 officers is the split that deal with that. Prevent, these again is police officers. These police officers are going into schools. It's about removing the cyber enablers and ensuring people aren't being drawn into cybercrime units. So those officers are going into the schools, liaising with head teachers, ICT heads and designated safeguarding leads to identify those children who may be at risk of being drawn into cybercrime. And protect, that's about building the cyber security and the resilience within the UK to be able to essentially protect ourselves from these attacks. And the function again with that within the cybercrime unit is I have 2 people who have joint protect prevent roles. So one is a prevent specialist and one is a protect specialist. That protect specialist will go out to businesses, provide events, safeguarding events, give protect advice to businesses. Whatever the business may be, we will tailor that and give bespoke advice to them in respect of their particular area of business. And again, that's about protecting them and ensuring they don't fall victims of crime. Every single person that reports a crime to North Yorkshire Police will receive protect advice regardless. So if they've been victim of a Computer Misuse Act offence, they've had an account hacked, they will be given advice and guidance on not only how to protect themselves, but how that likely happens so that they don't fall foul of it again. And prepare. This runs through all of the function. Everybody has a little bit of ownership here in terms of what we do around prepare. This is essentially us educating the public that
we can't stop every single cyber attack that happens. We simply cannot defend ourselves against it because there are constantly developing new forms of attack. And it's about preparing and having that readiness place for what happens if the worst does happen. And what we would like to, it's about having your playbooks ready there for a business of what they are going to do when they come into work at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning and they see that their computers have been subject to a ransomware. What are you going to do? Okay, next slide, please. I must thank the person who got that image of me from many, many years ago on that slide. I mentioned cyber-dependent crime. What that means is this is what we're looking at is illicit intrusions into computer networks, so hacking. We're also looking at the disruption and downgrading of computer functionality. So that will be ransomware attacks and also distributed denial of service attacks. Our bread and butter work is the Computer Misuse Act. That is what we deal with, and that deals with various different levels of hacking-related offences. So you have unauthorised access to computer material, so that may be a Facebook hack or your computer hack if a colleague sat next to you on their work computer and logged into your account. We then have Section 2 offences, which is committing further offences thereafter. That may be fraud offences once they've hacked your account. It might be sextortion. And then we have other offences such as intent to impair, recklessness, and basically just being disruptive. So that might be defacing a website or an ex-employee deleting business data out of malice after being fired, who still had access to the network. And then we have the most serious types of offending, which is targeting of critical national infrastructure. So those criminals are intent on such things as national grid, water, NHS, things of that nature. That is the most serious stuff. But in addition to that, we have the making and supplying of articles for use in cybercrime. So that's people actually creating the tools and selling them online so that people can commit these offences. So that may, for example, be creating a phishing suite that is purely designed to send scam emails out to thousands of people in the hope that one person will click on that and input their personal details. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to that, I said we obviously don't deal with cyber-enabled crime, but we do offer that help and support. So, historically, we've done a lot of work around online fraud and scams, but in the last 12 months, we've done a lot of work in terms of upskilling our economic crime colleagues and ensuring that they've been given relevant cryptocurrency training. So they've got a number of cryptocurrency strategic tactical advisors now who can deal with serious frauds, online frauds and cryptocurrency frauds. Examples being such as Martin Lewis deepfake frauds and things like that, or other investment scams that look very legitimate. So we've stepped back from that a little bit, but we've ensured that our colleagues across the force have got the relevant training skills and qualifications to be able to do that work. We support indecent image of children cases, so we have got extensive knowledge around file sharing, so peer-to-peer file sharing, which is one of the key areas where indecent image of children are shared online. We are proficient with dark web intelligence research and have a number of different software and tools to be able to look at people within North Yorkshire who are committing crime from here. And again, we are trained to use cryptocurrency and to understand the sale of child sexual abuse material and be able to track where those cryptocurrency payments are being made from and hopefully identify the perpetrators of that. We also support online technological domestic advice, stalking and harassment. So we offer technical surveillance countermeasure sweeps, a big word, but effectively that is a bug sweep, looking for hidden cameras, listening devices, tracking devices within the home to bring that reassurance to members of the public and victims of this horrible crime that, there's not still things happening within their own address. And as I've touched on before, that 24/7 on-call response that we give to serious and major crimes of murder, rape, things of that nature. So, high risk missing from homes. My team quite frequently will deploy to premises to look at the home router, for example, to establish when a mobile phone may have disconnected from that home address, which then gives the timeline of when that person was last seen at the premises. We may also identify other devices that we weren't previously aware of that might give us further means to be able to sort of like track their motions and identify where they are. And I know we've done a lot of work before historically where we've been able to, we've deployed to murder scenes, and we've been able to identify when a suspect has come into a premises by their phone connecting to the home router, when they've left, when they've returned to the home address. Generally speaking, that tends to be domestic related murders, ex-partners, friends, or persons who are known to the victim. But in essence, we've had proven success where we've been able to place people and their movements addressing those crimes. We can also do mobile phone. We're essentially digital forensic examiners as well for the period that we're on call. And we can download victims' mobile phones from murder scenes to enable, for example, an SAO to progress an investigation urgently. So we have done that in one instance where we've picked up a phone and we've done an examination at scene, and then we've been able to sort of identify the initial communications as to why that person was there, who they were meeting immediately prior to their death. And then that's obviously led on to further arrests. So that's the sort of capability that the unit has got in terms of the training. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're talking here about some of the pursue investigations that we do. So in addition to what I've just spoke about there, we receive action fraud referrals that come into us, and we've received 140 cyber-dependent action referrals last year, and that's a wide range of crimes. So that can lead from social media account compromises, just to a single account being hacked, be that Facebook or Instagram, through to denial of service attacks on websites, schools being taken down, and then large-scale ransomware attacks on multi-million-pound businesses. And unfortunately, that is happening in North Yorkshire, and it does happen on a reasonably frequent basis. What I can say in respect of our pursue investigations, and this is one of our mandated things that we do as part of the nationally led, regionally managed, locally delivered model, is that 100% of all cases that we receive from action fraud get an investigation. There is an investigation log put on every case, and everybody gets spoken to and a full investigation done. They also receive full protect advice from a specialist officer, as I've said before, obviously just to try and identify what the nature of the attack was, how that occurred, and how they can protect themselves from falling foul of that again in future. Next slide. Okay, so ransomware, the most significant cybercrime facing the UK. That's come from the National Cybersecurity Centre, essentially because cybercrime is so vulnerable to state-level sponsored espionage. Between April 2022 and 2023, we were the second most attacked country in the world, and North Yorkshire police businesses are regularly being attacked by ransomware. It has obviously significant financial, logistical and reputational impacts on the victims of the business of those. And quite often, you know, these don't always get reported to us until after the fact and things have happened. And there is an element that we're still not, I believe, seeing full reporting of ransomware incidents happening across the UK. Those are trends that we're seeing. But from the ones that we do see, essentially there are a range of different potential attacks that are happening. And what we've, so for example, businesses could be severely impacted by this by virtue of the fact that they didn't have any backups, for example, or their backups have been encrypted, which leads to an absolute total loss of data, and consideration has to be made by these businesses to pay the ransom, which law enforcement doesn't advocate, but we don't stand in the way of if that means that a business with 100 people who are employed by them is going to go out of business, and the knock-on effect of other clients and other businesses down the line. So the scale and complexity of these cyber attacks is really, really quite wide ranging. And unfortunately, these days now you can buy off-the-shelf tools, which is a software as a service, which means that less technically proficient criminals are now able to commit these crimes. So we're seeing more organised crime units being involved in this due to the potential profits they can make from this. So there are targeted attacks, but we also see a lot of just spurious attacks that are sent out there that are opportunist by some of these lower level criminals. Investigations are very complex, and they can take an incredible amount of time for them to come to fruition in terms of suspects being identified. And more often than not, a lot of these investigations have occurred from nation states which we have no reach in. So, for example, these may be known threat actor groups within Russia who we simply cannot reach. However, over time, we have had some success with this, with investigations where we feed back in to the NCA, and we've had investigations joint led by the NCA, FBI and Europol, where a victim in Richmondshire who had paid a significant ransom. 3 years later down the line, that cryptocurrency which they paid was tracked down, and it was tracked down to a money launderer, and they were arrested and those cryptocurrencies seized. So that gives you some idea of the nature and the scale and spread of some of these crimes, and how long it can take for this money to actually come to a position where it's identifiable and where it's been somebody's trying to check it out and realize that cryptocurrency asset. Next slide, please. Again there, so just another example of a recent investigation. So we do get referrals through from the National Cybersecurity Centre, where they have their own sensitive techniques for monitoring when businesses may have been subject to an attack. So they may be seeing initial indications that a company's data is being offered for sale on the dark web. In this instance, we had a business that was in the Scarborough area, who was a 35 million turnover business, big business, certainly in terms of providing a lot of jobs to the local rural area, and their network was infected by ransomware. They were fortunate in the sense that that ransomware hadn't been deployed, and we turned out to this address very, very quickly on the Friday evening, and essentially gave the necessary advice and guidance to stop that being launched and spread across the network. Which is what we tend to see is when these attacks happen, they happen after 5 o'clock on a Friday over the weekend when nobody's in, so that that ransomware can spread and it can mitigate across, we can spread across the network and have the most impact across that business. So getting there in that timely response that we can provide with our 24/7 service is critical to ensuring, that these attacks can't be successful. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm moving on to Protect now, and I'll just very, very quickly go over this in terms of the Protect operating model. So essentially, we deliver approved Protect messaging across the force. We do exactly the same as what any other force is doing across the UK in terms of material. And we also promote the use of police cyber alarm as well to identify local nominals engaged in criminality and ensuring all intelligence is shared to enable tasking and development. Cyber Alarm is a completely free tool funded by the Home Office to help businesses monitor and report suspicious cyber activity. And since it's been launched, it's had billions of successful events resulting in reports being sent out to members, enabling them to act and prevent a successful attack. So it's designed to detect and provide reports of activity, vulnerabilities, and enabling a business or an organisation to identify it before it occurs. So I would appeal to anybody who's watching this now in the public or business sector to look at Cyber Alarm as a product. It's really, really worthwhile. It's going to give you regular activity reporting, business information and intelligence, and help you protect yourself from vulnerabilities that may attack your business network. And in addition, there's another option as well that we do in terms of when we're talking to businesses and members of the public in terms of Protect notifications, and that's the North East Business Resilience Centre. So this is the stage where my Protect officers will hand on to a more long-term centre to be able to deal with small to medium-sized enterprise businesses. Again, the North East Business Resilience Centre is a police-led, not-for-profit organisation that provides this 24/7 cybersecurity support to these businesses, and they essentially offer a trusted service that forming partnerships with and offering cyber essential certifications to make sure these businesses are safe from cyber risks. It's free core membership. They get monthly newsletters containing information on threats, up-to-date versions and guidance from the National Cybersecurity, and basically on how to essentially keep themselves stronger and resilient from the latest threats that are out there. And there are more advanced services that they can obtain through the North East Business Resilience Centre, such as penetration testing of their business network at significantly reduced rates to what you'd expect to see in the private sector. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, just looking at Protect here, just some of the work we do. So talking about cyber escape rooms here, which is a really sort of innovative way of delivering training to groups. And in this particular instance here, we're doing an event to the Royal Yorkshire Regiment at York, putting them through the paces. So the exercise is effectively looking at teaching them how to recognise phishing emails, understanding data privacy, password strengths, and everybody's competing in an event to escape from the escape room in the quickest time. A lot of learning to be had throughout all that, but essentially what we're looking at here, and I go back to what we were talking about of how members of the public keep themselves safe. You know, the most basic things to do is to ensure you have strong passwords. Don't use the same passwords for all your accounts, have different ones for everyone. Ensure you're using some kind of like safe storage to manage your passwords. We recommend password management software, although equally certainly on iPhones and things of that nature, it has got built-in password management software in there that is secure, that will encrypt your passwords in there and keep them safe. And these are the best ways to keep yourself online. And as we've touched on already in this discussion, not everybody does things in the same way. Not everybody's got that same technical knowledge and competence. Look, if people have to write stuff down in a book and lock that in a safe somewhere, then that's a safe way of doing it. What isn't a safe way is having the same password for every single account you have online, for your email address, for your banking, because if once one goes, these hackers will get into every single account. And the main attack vector that we see for people's accounts getting hacked is phishing emails. Every single time, be that a member of the public or a business, it's responding to a phishing email. It's clicking on a link. It's filling out that information. This is how some of your data is getting compromised. There are other ways your data gets compromised, and we will advise members of the public on how they can check if their email address has been previously subject of a data breach. So, for example, if a business has been subject to the cyber attack and all their data was stolen. So there are a number of companies out there that have been subject to this. They may have taken your name, address, bank details, telephone number, and unfortunately your password as well. That is publicly available, and we highlight to the public if that information is there, and of course tell them to change their details as soon as possible. So just in respect of this, I would encourage any businesses or community groups to contact the Cybercrime unit if they would like a presentation or escape room or any of our training resources, and we'll definitely look to do that for them. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll not dwell on this too long, just some of the events that we've done in the last 12 months. We've basically been all over North Yorkshire Police, giving advice and guidance to the member of the public. What I've just reiterated there, we physically spoke to 1,500 members of the public at these events. You know, this is what we do every single day with our Protect officers out there, giving this kind of advice to members of the public to ensure they don't fall victim of crime. Next slide, please. And again, just looking at some of the presentations that we delivered to small and medium businesses, community groups across the area. I'll not talk through them all there, but Dementia Forward, we're regularly at Barclays Bank there giving advice, Carers Plus and Children's Family Services, but to name a few. And we also went to the Humberside Tech Week giving guidance there as well. So, you know, this is an ever-growing list. There are many that we haven't included in there. We are out there. You know, this service is free. We will give it to you. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is Prevent now. So this is what I mentioned before about us getting into schools, building those contacts with the head teacher and those dedicated safeguarding leads so that they know who to contact should they have concerns about somebody being drawn into cybercrime or being vulnerable to it. This is what we do in terms of we ensure that we're delivering approved cyber prevent material. So all the campaigning, all the messaging is exactly the same. And we essentially giving the mechanisms to the members of the public to be able to do those cyber prevent referrals. Each of those referrals is subject to a safeguarding assessment by one of my prevent officers in terms of what we're going to do, how we're going to manage this individual from a short to medium term perspective, and what support and advice we can give to them to that prevent subject to stop them being drawn into cybercrime. And that's not always just necessarily about educating that individual, it's about educating the parents as well that didn't know what their son or daughter was doing upstairs in the bedroom with the door closed, yet they'd recognise that suddenly they'd started buying things that were beyond their means, clothing, jewellery, aftershave, things of that nature, suddenly having those trappings of wealth for like a 15, 16-year-old boy who never leaves his bedroom. So that's another key area that we educate on as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is one of the bigger events that North Yorkshire Police are supporting the Regional Cybercrime Unit with, an upcoming event which is called Cyber Switch Up, the grand finals of which will be held at the Harrogate Pavilions on the 8th of August. But we held a massive event across all schools where we rolled out an application for them to engage and apply to enter into Cyber Switch Up. There was almost like a test there in terms of like determining who had the best cyber skills before identifying those people who could go forward. to the grand final. So this is about showcasing the skills of cyber digital talent across the region, promoting cyber digital career pathways in higher education and careers, and encouraging positive and lawful cyber behaviour. So if we've identified somebody who we thought was at risk of being drawn into cyber criminality, we will be looking to get them involved in cyber switch up and showing them the opportunities that are available to them in the private sector, working within IT and safeguarding against cybercrime and the money they can earn from entering into that world. Next slide, please. And prepare. Yeah, this is something that has historically been the less focused on P, but it's something that we are doing all the time, and we are now tying directly into the protect work we do. So when we're giving this protect advice to businesses, we're also talking about that business and getting them to engage and think about what is the nature of the risk of this business. So if you did come in tomorrow and your business had been subject to a ransomware and your computers were locked, what is the impact of that? So, you know, how are you going to get back up and running, and just sort of putting in place business continuity, and it's like sometimes an unknown word to some of the businesses that we talk to. What is your business continuity plan? To understand that, they need to understand what systems need to be secured and how they're going to try and resist against those cyber attacks. So are they, for example, an online business that is totally reliant on their website and the checkout services? Are they going to be, you know, vulnerable to a distributed denial of service attack? Are they in the manufacturing sector? Do they have all their drawings, schematic, customer details, key contacts, payroll, HR, all sat on one hard drive that's next to a computer that if that's gone, there's no way of getting their data back? And then this is about us sitting down and delivering to them the correct guidance, one message, one simple message from this National Cybercrime Centre of how organisations can defend against these attacks, be that malware or ransomware, and how to protect for that worst case scenario. Because as I've said, it can and it will happen. There are always new variants that come out, and we can't protect against everything. So you have to be prepared for this. And yeah, just moving on to next slide, please. So hopefully that has given you some understanding of cybercrime policing within North Yorkshire, the strategic requirements around cybercrime, the makeup of the department, some of the work we do and how that feeds into the regional cybercrime policing picture. And I'm happy to field any questions that you may have.
Gavin, thank you. Terrific presentation. And there are a whole host of questions that I'm keen to ask, but time's a little bit of a factor for us. So the first thing I'm going to propose is that my colleagues in the OPFCC work together with colleagues within Force for us to make sure that your presentation is promoted as widely as possible straight away after today, because there was a huge amount of information in there, and so much of this is about awareness raising, as you've already highlighted. I'll come to Amanda first to explore a question or two with you. So Amanda.
Thank you, Simon. I agree, Gavin, that was a really interesting presentation. I think members of the public will find that it's just a fascinating world that gains a lot of interest at the minute. So I do think it'd be useful if we can put together some additional material for the public around where they can find out some additional information, for example, and how they can protect themselves. Just a couple of really high level questions from me. Why do we think that the UK is one of the highest attacked countries? Is there any specific reason you think for that, or something that people in the UK and in North Yorkshire in particular can do more to protect themselves? Or is there any patterns that's been identified for that?
Well, that was obviously speaking in respect of ransomware. I mean, ultimately what this boils down to, Amanda, and I think the UK is one of the better places that actually has the infrastructure in place to record these cyber attacks. We are actively encouraging businesses to report this to Action Fraud. And you're right. How accurate is that data? Well, that is very much reliant on the fact of whether other countries are doing the same level of work we are doing to sort of promote that and encourage businesses to report it. I don't think there is any sort of specific reasoning why the UK is, obviously we've got a massive financial sector here within the United Kingdom, but certainly from my perspective, when I look at the crimes that are occurring, the ransomware attacks against North Yorkshire businesses, they are ultimately just looking for and attacking businesses that have found an exposed vulnerability against. So if there is a vulnerability against that network, they will look to move onto that network understand that business, and these organised crime groups are very clever, and they will look at a business, what its annual turnover is. They will look at what position they are in terms of being able to pay any ransomware demands that they make, and also what is the value of what they're going to extract from that business. So it's not just about encrypting the network, it's what data they can exfiltrate from that business. And it's a double threat ransomware. If you don't pay us to unencrypt your data, we will release this to the public, and it will bring ruin to your company, for example. So I think going back to what you said there, Amanda, it's about the fact that within the UK we have a good infrastructure there for reporting, and consequently we feature quite highly there in the statistics.
Thank you. And then there was just a bit of a couple of thoughts, really quick, I promise. So AI cybercrime, and you sort of mentioned artificial intelligence and deepfakes. It's very much a current issue at the minute, and you mentioned the Martin Lewis one. What can people do to protect themselves from being a victim of that, or in turn protect their own personal information as well, such as their voice, their face characteristics, from being used in those sorts of circumstances? Sorry, I know it's a tough question on the spot, but
it's not a tough question at all, Amanda. One of the things I would say is avoid doing things of this nature, because we've all provided sufficient voice recognition for AI to be able to do a fair representation of our voice, and not only that, visually as well. I don't have the answers to those questions, Amanda, because this is such a fast-moving, emerging area, very scary, and I'm aware of instances where this, essentially now you have banks and building societies who have voice recognition in place to recognise who you are. You use your voice as your security password to get onto online banking, who are now withdrawing those things from business services because of the nature of the threat here. It's very scary what you can do just from a short 45-second clip of your voice. You can make an accurate representation of somebody's voice. It may not get all the specific dialect and nuances of your voice, but it will make for a reasonably convincing attack. And it's, you look at the Martin Lewis thing, you only have to trick one person in 1,000. It's that sort of mentality. People may recognise as that being a deep fake. There will be people out there that don't.
Thank you. And then just the last one from me, because I think there'll be a lot of interest in this area. How as a pathway career can you get into this? Because there's the policing element, and I know at the start of the presentation you mentioned about warranted officers' role, where it's police officers. Is there also opportunities for non-warranted officers, non-warranted roles as well, so civilian staff can enter in this world within the policing environment as a career?
There isn't at the moment, Amanda, within our structure, but we do have similar and like roles within the function, that such as digital media investigators, who are civilian posts, and there's such a lot of crossover in things we do in terms of cybercrime and digital media investigations, as some of the advice and guidance I spoke about there in terms of scene preservation of work that they do, open source internet investigations, a lot of crossover. So there are opportunities with North Yorkshire Police to be DMIs, which, as I say, is very, very similar in many respects to quite a lot of work that the cybercrime unit do. The work that we do as warranted officers, obviously, I do use I obviously said there what we pull people into in terms of pursuing investigations, protect and prevent, but obviously we have crossover there, and we're using our warranted powers all the time in terms of what we're doing to make those arrests and such like. But there's nothing off the table, Amanda, in that respect. It was just how the cybercrime unit was initially built when it was first formed, and I know other forces do have civilianized persons within their units. Look, either way has positives and negatives. I lose people to the private sector because they're highly skilled, and I think the draw can be a little bit higher as well from what I've seen from some of the other forces with civilian members of staff, because of the essentially they don't have some of the like the police pension and things of that nature, which often hold police officers to the role a little bit more than members of the public. But for me, it's about the talent. And that's what I need in the role. So be that warranted officers, and if I can't find the talent with warranted officers, then that would be something I would take back to the chief officer team and say, look, we need to change here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Gawain. So as I say, the if time allowed, I'm sure we could spend a lot longer discussing this. But just to kind of close out on one theme, which this is an area where we know that underreporting remains an issue, and I think perhaps the public who find themselves victims maybe don't realise they're victims, maybe there's a degree of embarrassment, or maybe they just think of an element of cybercrime differently to the kind of conventional equivalent and the way that they would respond to that. So do you have an overall message for the public in terms of encouragement to engage with NYP and with colleagues in action fraud and elsewhere around these areas? We'll finish on that note if you do have such an overall message.
I think absolutely. I mean, unless we actually know about the nature of the attacks that are happening on us, we can't effectively police that. So absolutely, we need to know what the latest trends are, what the attack patterns are, and I would absolutely encourage any of the members of the public to report that to us. So be that social media attacks, we might think it's quite low level that our Facebook account's been hacked, but actually knowing about that, looking at the crime trends that are happening there, we can identify, for example, that may be linked to sextortions, or that may be linked to other different forms of crime that is becoming a national trend across the UK. And we have historically reported through to things where we've seen spikes and increase in certain types of cyber dependent crimes that then have nationally been fed out as this is happening. So I like to think we're in quite a good position here. We do get a lot of action fraud reports through to ourselves. And as I say, because we have got the time to actually look into these and give these thorough investigations, we do really go into depth in terms of every single offence that occurs. So absolutely, we will look to take forward and look at a social media account compromise. We wouldn't just write that off as being something that we couldn't detect. We would actually go to the provider and try and find out where that originated from and try and identify them. And we'll try and take that to an arrest phase and to actually deal with it. We deal with every crime, no matter how insignificant somebody may think it is, to the most serious, high profile business attacks, exactly the same way, and we will give it that same level of attention. So I would encourage anybody to report things through to us and we will deal with it seriously.
Gavin, thank you for that, and thank you to you for the presentation, and also to your colleagues in the team that deal with such professionalism with such a demanding and important workload. So thank you.
Thank you.
So turning now to the remaining time, I think in view of the fact that we've gone a little bit awry in terms of the timescales, what I'm going to do, if that's all right, Mabs, is to ask you just to move to the HMICFRS improvement plan progress, and to give us a very brief overview of the areas where you are most content with progress and you'd like to highlight to the public, and those areas where you think perhaps there is much done but still much to do. So if I could turn to you, and maybe you could take 5 minutes or so to cover that topic by exception, and then we'll move to questions from the public.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. To be fair, ACC Bissett has covered a lot of the slides in relation to the performance improvements that we've seen in North Yorkshire, and they're directly linked to the improvement plan, our response to HMI to improve the service to the public, importantly. So, David, if you can just move on one slide. So the key updates, if I can, very, very quickly, is the cause of concern. So colleagues and the public may remember, we received the HMI report on the 17th of March. Within the report, there was an area where we got inadequate, which was question what they describe as our strategic and workforce planning linked to our corporate services. And as a result of receiving that, there was a cause of concern. The cause of concern gave us 3 months to address the matters that they have raised with us in relation to our corporate services to improve the delivery of operational policing and service to victims and public. Them letters were fully evidenced and submitted to HMI within the timescale as agreed with HMI. There was over 100 separate pieces of evidence uploaded to the HMI's CFRS huddle, as they describe it. And then we had interviews on the 13th of July last week, and again on Monday this week with the SROs and heads of function. So those SROs were the interim assistant chief officer and myself, who covered off question 10 and question 9, which is about strategic planning and workforce, with the head of our people services, head of our finance, which has taken place, and there's a interview still to take place with head of our training, which is going to take place closer to August in agreement with HMI. As a result of them interviews and all the evidence we submitted, the initial feedback is very positive in terms of the progress we've made. It's too early to say anything formally in terms of where we are with regards to it, but certainly HMIC, the initial feedback, they're impressed with the level of change and progress, importantly, for victims and the public the force has made by addressing the cause of concern issues which link to the corporate services delivery of operational policing and service to the public. In addition to that, we've had the HMIC in last week to looking at what they call question 7 of appeal assessment framework. Question 7 relates to the management of serious and violent sexual offenders in particular. And the initial feedback again in relation to that question is positive, although we've got to have the formal response back from HMI. We've had an initial debrief and there was nothing startling raised of concern with regards to that. But again, it's too early to say as to what that will follow up into. In addition to that, we've got all the preparation in line for a follow-up inspection to see what progress North Yorkshire Police has made on behalf of the public in September and October. So moving on to the next slide. This is the improvement plan that we put into place following with the HMI inspection. This improvement plan was put in place following the debrief in November 2022. Everything is on track, bar what you can see, what is within Enable, which is around the leadership strategy and plan. That's missed. The reason it's showing as red, it missed the deadline with regards to completion of a strategy. We have got a draft strategy, we have got a draft plan. It was out for consultation and feedback, and because of the amount of feedback it's received, we've asked for that to be given an extension to give it the due regard really, and the time and effort it deserves in order to finalise. HMI are aware of that. There were no issues raised by HMIC. The key thing that HMICFRS were concerned about was a workforce strategy, which we have and we are effectively using, a recruitment plan, which we have and we are effectively using, and a very clear understanding of what our needs are as an organisation with regards to recruitment, retention, progression, retirements for 22-23, 23-24 and beyond, which we will be able to evidence and provide. There's nothing further I'll go through in relation to the improvement plan. The only thing that you can see on amber there is the reduction in the backlog for CROMU, which is the Crime Records Occurrence Management Unit, which is the finalisation items that ACC Bissett spoke about. That's amber because we've missed our own deadline. We would like to have that to have been in the 500s by now. We know the reasons why. Scott has talked through that and what the plans are in relation to it, but huge amount of progress in relation to reducing from 80% since November last year, an overall reduction of about 80%. The only other thing I'd like to mention, which is on the following slides, but we won't go to the slides as such, is the digital forensic unit backlog. So that was a key concern in terms of the amount of items we had that hadn't been examined and the impact that was going to have to victims. We've reduced our digital forensics unit backlog, some really amazing work by all the staff that are working within that department, by 69%. And we have a new service level agreement in the organisation that most items will be returned to the investigator within 72 hours. The reason I say most items, because there's always the occasional device that needs to take longer to break into to extract the information, or there's multiple pieces of information on a computer as such, which may take longer. But overall, really good progress. We're not sitting on our laurels. There's still much more for us to do, not only in preparation for the inspection, but as you can see from the performance slides that Scott already has presented on, there's much more for us to do as an organisation to get to the service levels and the outstanding gradings that we want to achieve in the future.
Mabs, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for that, and for cramming such a lot of information into some brief remarks as I requested. As you'll know, the Commissioner is very keen on behalf of the public that the force should show a remarkable standard of improvement by the time of the completion of this inspection round. And it would be remiss of me not to make that point on the Commissioner's behalf in this very public forum. But I also think it's fair to say that in terms of our informal dialogue with the Inspectorate, with whom we maintain a close relationship, we're also picking up some very positive signals in terms of the progress that they recognise within force. So whilst of course I thank you and your senior colleagues, I also extend that to everybody that is working in every aspect of North Yorkshire Police, and especially those areas where there was a requirement for a real lift and step change in performance. So thank you for that. What I'll do now, Simon Jones, with your assistance, if that's all right, is to move to public questions. That's not because I've forgotten about the spotlight questions for this session, but I'll put the public first, and then we'll move to some of the questions to the extent that time allows that the Commissioner was keen to raise on this occasion. And if time expires, we'll identify another way in which we can pose those questions and publish the answers. So let's start with Mr. W, who asks an important question about NYP support for road traffic arrangements in connection with Remembrance Day. I won't read the question verbatim, but I know you've had a chance, Mabs and Scott, to think about those questions in advance. Could I bring one or both of you in, please, to address Mr. W's concern? Yeah,
I'll pick up that, Simon, if that's okay. I think firstly start by saying understand how emotive this issue can be for obvious reasons, and we do have a large military and ex-military community within the county, and we know that. But if I just explain as to why we are where we are. For many years, the police service has provided a traffic management function for a wide range of public events. The Traffic Management Act 2004 then placed a duty on local traffic authorities, essentially local authorities, to manage traffic associated with planned events like sporting events, carnivals and parades. Although it was enacted in 2004, a lot of forces persisted with the same practices they had done before till about 2008. But a number of forces did adjust the position over that period, and it was very much left to local forces at that time. Whilst large remembrance events in the force area have utilised traffic management companies, North Yorkshire Police have continued to undertake those duties at the majority of smaller scale remembrance events. And important to note, in 2022, North Yorkshire Police supported 32 events with traffic management. Other police forces have now ceased providing traffic management for all events, including Remembrance Day. However, North Yorkshire Police have continued to provide this support, like I've just outlined. And our position, therefore, locally has diverged from elsewhere. There is a key legal position here that the police don't actually have the power to close roads unless it's an emergency. We don't have that legal route available to us to do it. The national direction from National Police Council, College of Policing, which is our professional body, is that policing should not take responsibility for closing roads or managing traffic other than in those emergencies. This is referred to in NPCC guidance on event policing and policing events in our command training. Both affirm that the responsibility events on roads lies with the Highways Authority, essentially the local authority, in conjunction with the event organiser. North Yorkshire Police will be amending our approach to ensure we comply with that NPCC advice and the College of Policing guidance and our current legal advice, as I've just outlined. We will therefore not be undertaking routine traffic management for any remembrance events in 2023. We may, of course, still sometimes need to undertake or supplement road closures with police resources where this is necessary around our core responsibilities, and an example of that might be counter-terrorism. North Yorkshire will continue to be part of ceremonial events through our neighbourhood policing teams, senior officers and local staff, and we would never come away from that commitment to being visible, recognising the sacrifice of the military and the contribution of our communities.
Scott, thank you. And you're right, it is an emotive topic. And whilst some aspects of what you've said may not align entirely with Mr. W's perspective on this and may be disappointing, I'm sure he will recognise the clarity and the candour with which you've answered the question, and of course set the important context around the legalities and the national policy level as well. Of course, Mr. W, if there are specific follow-up matters, I'm sure my colleagues in the customer service team in the Commissioner's office will be delighted to pick those matters up on your behalf. So Simon, could you move us forward, please, to the next question? This question is a long one, but it essentially relates to the force's plans and techniques to tackle shoplifting and shop-related theft. So again, in the interest of brevity, I won't read the question. Scott, am I back with you to address this question?
Yeah, I'll pick up all these, Simon, just to make it easier. So I think it's first highlighting what our process is, and I'll do this very short in short time. So we had a revised retail crime process which was launched in February 2022. The new procedure is designed to be smoother and more convenient for retailers, and will reduce demands on our appointment system, which we've now introduced. But the process will not apply when there are any aggravating factors. So, for example, I can see the question poses a question around where violence is used or threats are used or damage is caused. We would grade that appropriately, whether it's a shoplifting or not, and we would attend either immediately or within the hour, depending on the circumstances of the incident. So it's important when people report it to us, if it's ongoing at the time, it's a crime in progress, and we will go. And our demand and crime incident grading policy clearly states that. Where it's not, then obviously we will consider dealing with it in a different way. The benefit of not tying retailers to appointment time was actually based on feedback we got about we would rather not be tied to a time, and we want to submit the evidence in our own time. The issue is for us, and it's a key point of improvement, is we need an effective system for people to be able to do that. And we're already working on two systems, actually, one called NICE and one called Good Sam, which enables very easy submission of digital evidence, whether that be CCTV or something of that nature, through our system, so we can capture it and then we can start the investigation. The other point I should make is whenever we get a report of shoplifting, we do record it on our incident system, and we will also do that vulnerability assessment according to the circumstances of what we're told. If identification is possible from CCTV, as I've said, retailers will be invited to submit that along with a simple statement pro forma that outline the circumstances of the incident itself. And I do know in certain areas of the force where repeat shoplifting and offending takes place, and particularly that which involves threats of violence or antisocial behaviour, they're working very closely with local staff and neighbourhood policing teams to reduce the impact of that. The key is we're offender-led, but if people have been threatened with violence, as I've said, then we will respond accordingly.
Thank you, Scott. And at that point around escalation is a very, very important message, and goes to the heart of the second half of the question around that. Similarly, I know my colleagues in the customer service team will be happy to pick up any detail, particularly around that sort of, if I can put it this way, that customer experience in terms of online reporting, and any improvements that can be made in that are always very welcome, of course. So thank you, Scott, for that. So two intertwined questions from Mr. C, both of them relating to safeguarding and vulnerability, and how North Yorkshire Police is, I was going to say performing, but making arrangements to address not only some of the issues that we've the Inspectorate have highlighted, but more broadly to meet public expectation in this space. So I know I'm back with you, Scott, so over to you, please, to address this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So I am, just to go back, I'm ACC Local Policing and Safeguarding, so this all sits in my area of responsibility across the force. I think the force are very candid, as was the Commissioner, about our need to improve protecting vulnerable people. That was recognised last autumn. It'd actually been recognised before that, but Peel picked up on that. You'll be aware of the National Child Protection Inspections, basically the two inspections and the re-inspection, and then some of the issues that fell out of that. Pleasingly, if I could start at the beginning, we've just in the process of publishing our new force management statement. which has clearly done an assessment of the demand in this area, particularly around child abuse, adult abuse, domestic violence, mental health. And there are clearly some improvements that we must deliver. So, as you would expect, we've got robust plans in place to deliver an uplift in investigations. So if I can take two sections of that first. So we have a central safeguarding command that basically includes a lot of the specialist safeguarding elements. It might help the questioner if they wanted to revisit the online public meeting of the 3rd of May, because on there we covered in a lot of detail. I know we haven't got time now. We covered in a lot of detail what those specialist safeguarding uplifts look like, including putting a slide on the presentation about the roles, the nature of the roles, and the uplift that we were putting in there. So maybe that would help the questioner get a lot of level of detail. But that included, just for brevity, investment into a child exploitation team, missing team, a further investment into our offender management units who manage sex offenders and violent offenders, and all that's taken place has been secured. So that recruitment of those individuals into those posts that are outlined in that presentation is ongoing, and the majority, or if not, is out to recruitment, and we're doing that. The second area really related to how we manage our investigations out on the command. So in terms of where the work is allocated to properly to get a professional investigation through accredited child investigators and also those that can deal sensitively and effectively with victims of sexual abuse and assault. And we're currently in the process, and this will be delivered by early autumn in terms of a structure, of creating dedicated safeguarding investigation teams which are distinct from CID. And we will end up with two elements of serious investigation in each of the commands, one dedicated safeguarding investigation teams. We've done demand modelling about the level of investigations and the type of investigations that we would expect those teams to pick up and progress. And that modelling has underpinned the resourcing changes and structural changes that we're now in the process of delivering. But that uplift of resources, particularly accredited detectives, is really challenging. The service nationally are seeing real challenges around recruiting into those specialist detective areas, but we will have the structures, and we've got a plan between now and March 24 to ensure we bring the right type of resources in at the right level to make sure victims get the best service that we can provide.
Scott, thank you for that. Can I ask you a little bit of a follow-up, because it, although it's not been put directly to us by a member of the public, it's an important one, because I'm aware that HMI have done some broad national thematic work in relation to vulnerability and particularly the improvements that they think that policing needs to make to ensure that young children are not left in situations of vulnerability after an incident in which the police have been involved. So could you say a little bit about the work that I know that North Yorkshire Police have been doing to raise awareness amongst colleagues at all levels and in all roles in relation to the vulnerability of children and ensuring that we manage the kinds of risks that HMI have identified?
Yeah. So there is, protecting vulnerable children is at the very heart of what North Yorkshire Police has to do, and we need to do it really well and offer that exemplary service that we talk about delivering. We've put an awful lot of focus on effective workforce development, really, over the last 6 to 12 months. That's including upskilling and awareness for our call takers in the force control room to be able to identify vulnerability at the first point of contact and really think about what we would call voice of the child, capturing that voice of the child. That feeds then through to officers that are attending incidents where they are able to recognise vulnerability. They capture the voice of the child, which is really important in terms of the circumstances that young person finds himself in. And then really importantly, safeguarding is only ever as effective as the strength of partnership approach to that. So we have a formal process in policing called public protection notices, or PPNs. we've put an awful lot of effort into improving the submission and the quality of those PPNs, those public protection notices, which captures information. For example, a young child at an address who is in distress, it will capture the state of the address, who was there, the demeanour of those who was there, the demeanour of the child themselves. That's then submitted through a multidisciplinary, multi-agency team who bring their joint expertise together to determine what the next steps are. And that can end up in a formal strategy meeting to ensure the safety and welfare of that child and considerations around the broader family. What we're seeing is a significant increase in both the quality and quantity of those public protection notices. And interestingly, obviously, one of our key partners is North Yorkshire Council Children's Services, who do have an outstanding grading for their services. We work very closely with them. And our partners would say to us that the work we're now doing at that front line, at the really acute space of protecting children, is of an improved and a much higher quality, which is helping us to deliver a better service and carry out safeguarding to a higher level. So that just gives a flavour. I think that's maybe what you were asking,
it is.
Simon, around that.
It is indeed. Thank you for that, Scott, and thank you to Mr. C for raising those issues. I should just say that this particular member of the public has also very kindly sent us some issues that were specific to fire and rescue scrutiny, which we won't obviously cover today, but we will in future. So, Simon, could you move us on to the next slide, which is on a different theme, which, to be fair, Scott, you have touched a little bit on in terms of burglary and robbery, and I think specifically you did mention HMI in that context as well. So was there anything in addition that went to the heart of Mr. H's question that you'd like to highlight?
No, I think the report is really valuable in helping forces improve the response to burglary. I'll touch on three areas very quickly. It talks about effective call management at the front end, recognising vulnerability in a timely response. I think I've already touched on that. We had a force performance meeting earlier today, chaired by the deputy. Very clear evidence of appropriate both identification of either an immediate response required or a priority. And in the vast majority of cases, we're compliant with responding in that way. We also respond to 100% of residential burglary, which came out of the National Police Council last year. So in terms of one element of responding effectively, we're highly effective, I would argue. We go to everyone and we go in a timely way. The second part of that report really speaks about capturing victim needs assessments at the front end. You'll know the work that we've done to identify vulnerability of victims when they call us, and that forms part of our improvements, and that's recognised. We talk about how forces allocate those investigations. We're content they're investigated to the right people with the right skills to do the right investigative work. And we talk about investigative standards. We know we've improved hugely, as the Deps touched on, in terms of digital forensics, which is a key part of burglary investigation, but can take some time. But we also recognise where we've got to make improvements, and some of that is in our supervisory oversight, driving the right outcomes, timely investigation plans, and directing officers to what they've got to do. And then the fourth and final element of that report related to crime reduction and problem solving approaches. And I'd just like to touch on this really, because the Commissioner's had a hand in this. Number one was the Safer Streets funding that you'll be aware of, that we have applied to vulnerable premises, particularly in the farming and rural community, to target harden their houses and their outbuildings, but also on the periphery of the county. So places like Cononley over with border in West Yorkshire, we've really delivered a lot of funding and support to preventative work. We have designing out crime officers as part of our partnership hub, and we do early intervention and prevention work through our MPTs when we spot ongoing trends. So they were the four key elements coming from that report. And I would genuinely say we need to improve the quality of our investigations. And I know I've said that before, but across that report, I think we could be confident we are delivering a good service across those pillars.
Scott, thank you. And I'll mention one other thing just for public information, because largely because I haven't mentioned it so far, and that is just to remind the public that the Commissioner's Office provide a bespoke service to support victims. We have a team in-house that are available in respect of matters that are reported to North Yorkshire Police and matters that aren't reported to North Yorkshire Police, to support victims and to signpost to services, whether they're things that we commission or that are available from public and third sector partners across North Yorkshire and York to support victims to cope and recover. And my colleagues in the office will promote the contact details of the supporting victims team after this meeting. Mabs, did you want to come in on the operational topic on the screen or something more broadly, perhaps?
No, just on that very quickly, Scott, you did drop out a little bit, but I don't think you covered it. Was one of the things that we had an update on today on the reassurance, and certainly to Scott as the ACC for local policing and safeguarding, was our attendance rates at burglary. So we have a 100% attendance rate at burglary, where there is an attendance required as per the national guidance that was set out. We've been monitoring that since last year, and we've got now an obligation to put the reporting back into the Home Office. So it was really reassuring that where we should be attending, we are attending, which gives us the opportunity to capture evidential opportunities, but also importantly, reassure the victim, because it can be a very invasive type of crime.
Mabs, thank you, and a point well worth reassuring the public about in terms of attendance and the support that's available. So grateful for that. Thank you. And thank you to Mr. H for the question. We'll move on to a couple of issues that are really about standards, ethics, and public confidence issues. So Mr. T asks a question in relation to corruption and how the force combats and protects and prevents in relation to that. So over to North Yorkshire Police on this topic, please.
Yes, I can quickly pick that up. I'm the appropriate authority for North Yorkshire Police as the lead for professional standards, as the Deputy Chief Constable, and for ethics. Professional standards departments have been following national guidance, not only from the College of Policing, but from the National Police Chiefs Council. They operate in a very similar way against a code of practice, which is set against police officer and police staff regulations and code of conduct. That's overseen by the IOPC where appropriate, where it's either an investigation led by the IOPC or it's an investigation which is managed by the IOPC but locally led. We're confident in terms of how our investigations are conducted. I only yesterday a performance meeting with the Professional Standards Department themselves, going through the number of investigations they have, the number of officers that we have currently suspended across the force, number of staff we have currently suspended, or those who have been served notices and are undergoing an investigation. The issue of impartiality is an important one, but I am confident in terms of where there is an issue of an officer's familiarisation with either a complainant or somebody who may be subject of an investigation, that's appropriately flagged and recorded, and either we look at somebody else within the department to investigate, and if it's a senior officer, depending on the requirement for the impartiality, we have even gone either outside of a force for either a peer review of that investigation or the investigation to be conducted by another force area.
Mabs, thank you for that, and again, it's an opportunity for me to just make a point on behalf of the Commissioner's Office, and that is to say that we are one of only, I think, still 2 areas who operate the fullest extent of the government's complaints reform models, and that means that every complaint initially is handled and processed by the Commissioner's team. We are entirely independent in the way that we operate, and the staff that deal with those cases don't have a policing background. They have other professional backgrounds with a particular specialism in customer service, and that mixture of skills and experience, combined with colleagues in PSD who deal, of course, as you've explained, Mabs, with the most serious of cases, means that we're able to offer a very rounded service to the public in that respect. And whilst I won't dwell on the sort of performance side of things, we have a very a significant track record of identifying solutions to cases where there are public concerns, and to do so quickly and effectively with high levels of satisfaction. But that point around independence is one that's well worth us making, because we do operate very differently in North Yorkshire to most other areas in that respect. Thank you, Mr. T, for that answer, for that question, I should say. And then there's one matter which we were, I think it's fair to say, slightly hesitant about introducing into the public domain on behalf of AG, who's been anonymised in that initial fashion, because I think it's fair to say that this particular matter relates to a matter of ongoing dispute. But nonetheless, the core essence of the question raised by AG is a matter of public concern, and that is how NYP sets and enforces standards of expected behaviour in relation to officers, but with a particular focus, Mabs, as you'll recognise, in relation to the confidence that the public can have about officer behaviour in respect of sexual harassment and bullying. So on that general topic, I'd invite you, please, to say a few words in relation to NYP's engagement with that important area of standards business.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's clearly an important area when you look at national events and what's taking place. It feeds into our legitimacy and public confidence of us as a service. We have very clear policies in place in relation to this, which are robustly communicated out to the organisation, and I'm not afraid to say robustly enforced, where people's behaviour or standards of behaviour falls below what we or any member of the public would expect. And it links to what I've said previously in terms of how they are then investigated by the force.
Thank you for that, and thank you, AG, for raising the question and the issue. Simon, can I just confirm whether we've received any further questions during the course of the meeting?
No, we haven't.
Thank you, Simon. So there's a couple of linked issues which I will select from the spotlight section, and I'll exercise 5 minutes worth of chair's discretion on those matters, if that's all right. So linking to the topic we've covered in the last couple of public questions, there's been some recent controversy in relation to the length of time that police forces retain published details of misconduct outcomes on the force's websites. Mabs, could you explain, please, how long North Yorkshire Police retain those published details, and assist us, please, with signposting to the relevant policy material for members of the public around that to reassure them?
I don't have that information to hand, Simon, but I can get that to your office, and also the links to actually how to obtain the information.
Thank you. Grateful for that. And then there was another matter, which again, because it's topical, I'll raise it. You may or may not have the information at your fingertips. There was an issue in the broadsheet media recently highlighted in relation to an aspect of the Metropolitan Police website, and I think other police force websites, harvesting data via a tracking tool and making that data available to Facebook. I understand that isn't the case in North Yorkshire Police, but I'll raise it in public and just ask whether you're in a position to confirm that, or whether perhaps there's again anything for us to explore in relation to that in more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I'm aware of the issue that's been raised in relation to the Metropolitan Police. Clearly, they have a slightly different position on it to what has been reported. In relation to North Yorkshire Police and ourselves, it's not anything that I have been made aware of as the CIRO for the force. So I'm the Senior Information Responsible Officer, which is a legal duty that I have on behalf of the Chief Constable. And it's not one that's been flagged to us that we've done anything which would breach our responsibilities under the Data Protection Act or with the Information Commissioner's Office.
Thank you, Mabs. And and I'll finish on again, sorry, it's a common theme, but I think it's important to ask these questions given the thrust of some of the public questions, and also the inquiries made of the Commissioner this morning at the Police, Fire and Crime panel. So the issue of vetting of police personnel remains a continued source of public interest. Of course, as you and I are both aware, MABS, the force is at the cutting edge of some improvements that have led the way nationally around that. And I'd just invite you to remind the public of Project Prism and other matters where North Yorkshire Police are ahead of the national trend in that respect, and also to give any further reassurance that you're able to give about the vetting situation within North Yorkshire Police.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. All officers and staff are subject to vetting, different levels of vetting depending on the information they have access to, or their ranks and roles or grades within the organisation. There's a national framework and code of vetting conduct that we have to abide to as a vetting department. Operation Prism was something that was piloted and we nationally led on, which has been adopted by every force in the country and the National Police Chiefs Council, following the issues that were raised with the Wayne Cousins case and the David Carrick case in the Metropolitan Police. We approximately run 3,000 officers and staff through that database on a monthly basis to look at if there's anything that's been flagged in relation to their conduct with regards to intelligence, any issues in either our force area or other force area which they haven't declared. And I'm pleased to say that we didn't have any issues as a result of the initial vetting pilot that we conducted or the continuous checks that we are conducting in North Yorkshire.
Thank you, Mabs. I appreciate it's a topic we've touched on at most meetings, but it's one that bears repetition. So thank you for that. That's allowed me to ask a selection of the questions that most closely related to the public concerns. And thank you for your patience as we've gone over time by 10 or 15 minutes or so. That, unless anybody has any other business, I think concludes today's online public meeting. Thank you, colleagues, for your kind attendance, and thank you to the public for your contributions and kind attention as well. Good afternoon.
Thank you.